Welcome to the latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staton, Adam Nathan, Robbie Williams here because the season's over and it's a week since we joined together to discuss the win in Arizona and what was going to happen next. Obviously, a lot's happened since then. Robbie, you and I have had a conversation about Pete Carroll's departure. This is going to be more focused on what happens next, the kind of preferences that we'd like to see, what direction you want to see the team go in, what we think is going to happen. But Adam, given that you couldn't join us for the sort of instant reaction to Pete Carroll's departure, I thought we'd start there and just get your take on everything that has happened this week.
I think shock was certainly the first thing. You know, my Stuart called me, who I do my show with, and said, you know, and I saw a missed call and WhatsApps and he's gone. The chef, the tweets flying around. And I don't think I was sort of happy when it happened, but then obviously you do start thinking about all the stuff we've spoken about. And I think the ultimate feeling I had after half an hour of processing was, it's time. And, you know, I think this is probably the best way we can do this without ruining legacies, without further affecting the team. And then obviously you get all the takes and the discourse, and you read so much on both sides that you can start convincing yourself that you're miles off whichever way you want to look at it. But I think if you try and stay true to your convictions, which I always try to here, and when I'm talking to anyone, I think it was the right time to make the move. I think Pete Carroll gets to leave an unquestionable legend of the Seahawks. There's never boo boys really in the stands. There's never sort of widespread calls for his head from not casuals, but sort of the media have to talk about stuff. We have to talk about stuff. It never gets to a point where it becomes sort of aggressive or disrespectful. And he was able to go out with a nice press conference, albeit sort of taking a few little side jabs at the time whilst doing it at various people. But, you know, that's always compete, I suppose. And I think it's come to a head in quite a nice way, that if the transition is as seamless as possible, they've done this in the correct manner, I think.
Bobby, I've never been more convinced that the Seahawks did the right thing than the moments immediately after listening to Pete Carroll's final interview on 710 Seattle on Friday. Listening to that, it felt to me like a man who just had, who was almost a little bit desperate. Like he wanted to keep his job. He didn't have answers to the immediate problems that are lingered in Seattle, such as the run defense, and was now resorting to sort of excuses and appeals to authority. I'm a football guy and you're not, therefore I cannot explain this to you in a suitable way, which will make you understand that I should stay. I just thought this is, you know, with the greatest respect, I'm glad that this is the last time I'm going to hear Pete Carroll speak as somebody who is leading the Seahawks, essentially. And it was a very emotional press conference when that announcement was made, and he went and fair play to him for all that he's achieved. But I have to say, Robbie, listening to that interview, I thought, not only am I happy that the Seahawks are going in a new direction now, but I kind of feel like this was a few years overdue.
Yeah. I'm going to give Pete just a little bit of credit on that interview, just for the simple fact, when you're fired, there's going to be some bitterness. You know, when you get let go from anything, there's going to be some animosity, whether you mean to or not. And he was probably, you know, as he was speaking, maybe spoke a little bit out of turn. I mean, because if he knows, I mean, a non-football guy is the one who gave him the job. So, I mean, it's easy for him to say non-football guys are the ones that let him go. But the reality is we've all seen it for, you know, as you said, it's been a few years coming. You know, it's time to move on to a new era of Seahawks football. And, you know, he will always be a legend here, and there will be a time where he comes back and will be fully celebrated. I have no doubts about that. And hopefully he knows that. And, you know, hopefully when the time comes and he comes back to Seattle, that Seattle fans shower him with love, because he deserves all the credit that he can get for taking us where he did. But at this point, it is time for a new direction, and I'm really excited to see what they do with it.
My final comment on Pete Carroll's sort of week before we move on to what happens next. I saw a great comment on somebody posted on the blog earlier that because he was talking about football people. Football people had consistently solved Pete Carroll's game plans with ease. And that is ultimately why he lost his job. It had nothing to do with non-footballing people making a decision. So we're sat here. I've got the TV on and just across from me here, and I'm watching the first half of the Cowboys against the Packers. The Cowboys have scored a touchdown right before half time as we're recording this live. So to an extent, it's game somewhat back on. Dak Prescott almost threw an interception in the red zone right to the end, which would have meant that it's probably game over if that would have happened. But they've got back into it now. Adam, I'm watching that and I'm thinking, there's a lot of reasons why the Cowboys are losing here. And a lot of it goes on Dak Prescott. A lot of it goes on the offensive play calling. A lot of it goes on the head coach and maybe not having Dallas as prepared as they should be to play this game. But a portion of the blame goes to Dan Quinn. They are looking very easy to play against. There are wide open receivers being schemed. It's very little resistance from that Dallas defense against Green Bay. And the Packers are 27-7 up at half time. A lot could happen in the second half. But as I was watching that, Adam, I can't say that I was particularly enthused at the thought of Dan Quinn as the next Seahawks head coach watching that first half.
Two main thoughts for me, really. The first one is that the Seahawks have to find a way to engineer a position where they are slighted by Dak Prescott so that your Let's Ride video, Rob, can be recreated with Dak Prescott's here we go cadence. Because as stupid as that cadence sounds when they're winning, when they're 27-0 down, God, does he sound like a right prick. So that's the first thought that I had. And the second one is that I feel that like Seahawk fans have to give themselves reasons to want to hire Dan Quinn. I have to confess, I've not read your long read article yet, and perhaps that's going to change a lot of my mind on it. I don't even know which way you went with it, so I can't even say one way or the other. But coming at it, it strikes me that, yeah, Seahawk fans have to sort of trying to convince themselves into Dan Quinn. And if this is the biggest decision that the Seahawks have made in 15 years probably, I want someone that you're looking for reasons not to hire him almost because it's such a home run as opposed to, well, doesn't do that, but that could be good and that could be good. That for me is an immediate red flag, to be honest.
Which is exactly what the article is essentially doing. It's saying here are the positives, here are the cons. But I don't think anybody reading it, and I would recommend that people check out SeahawksDraftLog.com because I'm not going to review a 3,500 word article here. But you don't come out of it going, this is the guy that we have to have. There are positives. His experience is a thing. You are looking for a CEO, not just a coordinator to lead your team. And I mentioned in the article that I've watched interviews. It has been a particularly boring last few days, I have to say, in my life. Just watching press conferences, interviews, mic'd up segments. I know it's a good job that I'm married because nobody else would have me, right? With this as being my social life right now, that I'm watching stuff like this to get a feel for who the candidates are.
And I've met her and she seems to not hate you, which is quite impressive.
I know. She even made me a brew before we started. So it's okay. That's what I've been doing. And the point I'm getting to is Dan Quinn is the most impressive public speaker of the candidates who have been linked. He speaks with an authority. He speaks with the wisdom that comes with experience. There's real clarity in the words that he's saying. You can well imagine him standing in front of a room of however many people it is, 100 people on the first day of training camp, and all eyes and ears being focused on Dan Quinn and them listening intently. There's not going to be any embarrassing clips like we've seen with Nick Sirianni or Jonathan Gannon giving a speech where they become sort of memes on Twitter. We're not going to have any of that. And then the other thing is building a staff. Dan Quinn has shown, and I sort of detailed the staffs that he's built in the past, the places that he's worked, the way that he's empowered his coaches, the fact that he is very different to Pete Carroll in the way that he's gone about approaching his coaches, that he's not going to bring in an offensive coordinator, for example, and force upon him a son or a potato-based nicknamed fella and make him go and work with the offensive coordinator. This is a very different approach. And I do think there are real positives to Dan Quinn in that regard. But Robbie, watching that and watching the games yesterday, less so the Miami-Kansas City game, which I think was completely impacted by the weather and just Patrick Mahomes' brilliance to play through that weather, as opposed to Miami just being too injured and too unprepared to play in essentially a freezer in Kansas City. But the Bobby Slowick Houston Texans display against Cleveland's number 2 defense in the league, I just come away from those games thinking I want to see the Seahawks with an offensive-minded head coach. The offensive football in the NFL in 2024 is about setting the tone. It's about dictating to your opponent. It's about scheming a game plan to score points and win. And I don't know if you can do that as a defensive-led head coach. Who are the great defensive-led teams who are in this playoffs? There are good defensive teams like Baltimore who have the number 1 defense, but they don't have a defensive-minded head coach. So it feels like the league's gone in a certain way, Robbie. And as I'm watching this, I'm more convinced than ever that Ben Johnson, if you can prize him away from the Commanders, or Bobby Slowick, or one or two other candidates that I want to throw your direction tonight and talk a bit about why I think some of the outside candidates could be interesting as well. For me, Robbie, that's the direction I want this team to go.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I want to go on the offensive side of the ball. I want some young offensive guru to come in and kind of lead this team going forward. Now, talking about pros and cons about Dan Quinn, I'm not saying I want Dan Quinn by any means. I think it would be a lateral move. I don't think there's much benefit to it. You have to start thinking about who these guys bring with them, right? And Rob, you and I were just talking off the air for a second about, why Jed Fish to the Huskies, and you were saying something about maybe they bring the quarterback with him, maybe those are kind of things. So you look at other teams and what they do. And I saw earlier article this week where Micah Parsons was talking about, Dan Quinn's future, and he goes, well, he might take me with him. Now that right there, I could get on board with that, but I don't know. I want someone, as you say, Bobby Slowick, and yet you wonder how much, CJ Stroud plays in, effect into him and how good he is. But, I still think there's a lot that can be said about who comes with these guys that you're gonna bring. You had wrote your article earlier, and you're like, Dan Quinn has a proven track record of bringing guys with him, bringing, hiring the right staff and such. And though I agree, I still think that it's just too lateral of a move, and I don't really feel like we're starting a new era. It feels like we're just rewashing kind of what we already had and putting it back in there and seeing if it sticks.
I think there is some leverage that the Seahawks have over Dan Quinn, because I don't know if you saw this. There was a report from Mike Fisher, who's a very well-connected journalist in Dallas, saying that Quinn wants the Seahawks. And if you're John Schneider and you know that Dan Quinn's preference is to come to Seattle, you can go away and be convinced by anybody else first. And then if you do the interviews and nobody blows you away, you can come back to Dan Quinn knowing that he wants the job. So there is something to be said for having that as almost a worst case scenario, which might not be a terrible, terrible thing to have, because there are some positives to Dan Quinn, even if, right now while we're watching this and watching his defense play, they're not abundantly clear. So that is quite interesting. And listen, there are some positives to Dan Quinn. I think he would be very different to Pete Carroll. Again, check out the article I've written today, because schematically he has admitted and embraced that when he was at Atlanta, he ran the Carroll defense, the cover 3 system, and to a T, and would not shift off it. And then since he's gone to Dallas, I'm not an X's and O's guy, so I can't break it down here for you. But other people have done it, and they've explained how adaptable he's been, that he will give opponents certain looks and then switch out of it at the last minute, and he keeps opponents guessing. The one other thing that concerns me a little bit about Dan Quinn, I think I'm right in saying, somebody tweeted me this, or somebody mentioned this in a comment earlier, that Dan Quinn is 0-3 against Kyle Shanahan while he's been at Dallas, including a 42-10 beatdown. Now, again, that's not just on the defense or Quinn. It's Dak, it's Mike McCarthy, it's Brian Schottenheimer. But it's hard to say. Whoever comes in is going to have to go toe-to-toe with Shanahan and McVay. I think whoever the Seahawks appoint, you have to have confidence, guys, that they can at the very least be on a par with those two. You have to believe that, maybe not straight away, but within a year or two, you can overtake them. Now, when Seattle brought Carroll in, he was playing catch up with Harbaugh, and it took a bit of time. I think Carroll, didn't he lose the first 3 games against Harbaugh when he was in Seattle, if not more? He lost the 2 games in 2011 and then the 3rd game in 2012, and then they won the 4th game. So he was 0-3 before then winning the 4th game, and then the tide turned in favor of Carroll, and the Seahawks are beating Harbaugh quite often. Whoever takes this job, they can have a bit of time to get things going. They can lose 2 or 3 games to Kyle Shanahan's juggernaut or Sean McVay, but after that, they have to be going and beating these guys. They have to be going and competing with them. You have to feel like we've got our answer to them. And I have to say, I'm not convinced that I can ever see anybody turning around in 5 years' time and going, Dan Quinn's the best coach in that division, ahead of McVay and Shanahan, or McShanahan, as I've started calling them. And I kind of want to see if we can find our own version of that. So that's kind of the direction that I've been heading. Get your super chats in. We've had a few already, so I'll jump to those now. Thank you, Glenn. No comment, but just supporting the channel. Really appreciate that. Be Calm C clearly says, anybody but Quinn. There you go. That's his view. Thank you for your support. I sent another one in as well. I want the Texans offensive coordinator, Bob Slick, which is a nice nickname for Bobby Slowick. Bob Slick sounds a lot cooler than Bobby Slowick, I have to say. Thank you, Be Calm C clearly, for that. And this one from John says, let's go Mike McDonald at head coach and Brian Callahan at offensive coordinator. The problem with that is that it's not a problem so much. You can get Callahan or some of these others as an offensive coordinator because they're not calling the plays where they are. And if you give them an assistant head coaching title and play calling duties, it could be deemed as a promotion, and you can get them to Seattle. And that might appeal to them if they're going to work with a defensive-minded head coach like Dan Quinn. So there is a chance for that. But I think if you're going to want someone like Callahan, the greater likelihood is that you're going to have to make him the head coach. So where are you at, Adam? Where are you sort of, if you'll have heard some of the names, I'm not expecting you to have done a deep dive or watched bloody press conferences like I have into who the candidates are, but the lay of the land right now, what is the vision? What is your vision for the Seahawks? What would your preferences be? How are the Seahawks going to look in not just this year, but moving forward? What do you want that identity to be? Because identity was a big thing with Carroll, and he delivered on that. Whoever comes in now has to have a vision.
I think I'm pretty zoned in on Ben Johnson being the guy that should be targeted first, second, and third, to be honest. Like, Slowick has obviously done a great job thus far in Houston, but it's 1 year. I think Johnson has shown over the couple of years he's been with the Lions and the progression of their offense. And let's be honest, the Seahawks are probably, I don't think I'm over-egging the pudding, but the Seahawks should be at worst the second most attractive job available. I mean, the Chargers have got Justin Herbert, that an offensive-minded quarterback coach might think, well, look, that's a great job for me because I could have him for 10 years. The owners are richer than God, so there should be nothing financial that stops them from going after the right guy. And I don't know, I don't see any reason why we should be zoning in. You know, people are going to have preferences, you know, offensive guy, defensive guy, but I think if you choose which one of those you want, and I think there's a pretty clear hierarchy within that. So for me, it's kind of Ben Johnson's the one that I'll be disappointed if they don't get, I think, because I think he has enough pedigree, has shown enough in the last few years under Dan Campbell that he clearly knows what he's doing. It just doesn't seem that complicated to me. One question I do have, though, is that everyone talks about John Schneider coming through the Green Bay system, and as a result, always wants to draft quarterbacks as sort of like a throwaway thing. But just looking at like the Packers' history of coaches, are they not they generally not sway towards offensive-minded head coaches that call their own plays as well? I'm thinking sort of Holmgren and McCarthy and LaFleur. I just wonder if that might have something to do with the way in which Schneider might think about this stuff, because that's the system he's been brought up in.
So just ask that again, Adam. You're saying that they're not swayed towards offensive coaches?
They might be swayed towards an offensive-minded head coach, because they always talk about John Schneider has grown up in the Green Bay school of thinking, and the Green Bay school of thinking generally tends to go towards offensive-minded head coaches that call their own plays.
Yes. I had a look, and so the one individual who John Schneider has often referenced as like had the big influence on him was Ron Wolf. And Ron Wolf appointed Mike Holmgren. There was then a coach in between. His second name is Rhodes. I can't remember his first name. He lasted one season, who was a defensive-minded head coach, but he went 8-8. Was said to have underachieved, so they fired him, and then they brought in Mike Sherman, who was an offensive-minded head coach. And then Ted Thompson went with, obviously, Mike McCarthy, and we've then seen Matt LaFleur come in at Green Bay. So there's been a steady run of offensive-minded coaches and the identity of the Packers being a quarterback. And I genuinely believe that is what Schneider's vision is going to be. I think that's what the Seahawks are going to do. I know there's been a lot of connecting Quinn to the Seahawks. I do wonder a little bit whether this report from Mike Fisher is almost a call to arms for Dan Quinn. Hey, I really want this job. Please, do take me seriously. I do want this. But I can see Schneider interviewing a lot more offensive coaches than defensive coaches. I think he will speak to Quinn and Mike McDonald, and so he should. But I think he's going to look for somebody who he thinks can be, not necessarily a Pete Carroll, charismatic, whoa, rah, rah, yeah, dominant personality of the team, but somebody who can coach a quarterback, somebody who can put an offense together, somebody who's just going to deliver a system, and that what actually the identity of the team might be moving forward is whoever they draft next at quarterback, that is the way that they're going to go. And I do think there is something to that Green Bay history, which will shape what John Schneider does next. I think this is going to be a lot different than people realize. I think Schneider's going to go well away from what has happened for the last 14 years. And this is going to be very different, very John Schneider. And Robbie, the best way to make this different is to make it an offensive-driven team moving forward, where you put all of your focus on how can we make DK Metcalf as productive as Amon-Ra St. Brown, for God's sake, and CD Lamb. And it's not impossible. Like, Tyreek Hill's a freak of nature. He's one of a kind in the way that Marshawn was. You're not going to get another Tyreek Hill, but Amon-Ra St. Brown isn't. He's the third most productive receiver in the league. DK Metcalf can do that. Jackson Smith and Jigba can do that. I think John Schneider is going to go to somebody who can get the best out of them and can make those running backs that they've spent 2 second-round picks on a real threat in games, as opposed to an afterthought, Robbie.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear what both of you think on Todd Monken as well from Baltimore. He's been a name that I've saw kind of thrown around as well. I know Mike McDonald gets thrown around a lot from the defensive side of the ball, but he's done pretty well at Georgia, in Baltimore. He seems to be a name that, could be someone that I don't think a lot of people are talking enough about. So curious what you guys think about that. And then from the offensive side of the ball, look what he's done with the Ravens this year.
I am a bit concerned about Tom Monken just because he's been an offensive coordinator 3 times in the NFL. He lasted 1 year with the Buccaneers before that was that. He lasted 1 year with the Browns before that was that. He then went to Georgia, and listen, coaching Georgia, it's like when he was there, it was like coaching the Harlem Globetrotters. It was not a particularly challenging role. And now he's come to Baltimore, and it's not just a Todd Monken thing for me, Robbie. It's any coordinator who leans on a star, for me, I view with a suspicious eye. And he has been in charge. Now, you have to give him credit because Lamar Jackson's had a very good year. And they've made a better use of their weapons this year. But he still has Lamar Jackson. And I do wonder if he had a lesser quarterback, would Todd Monken be being talked about as a head coaching candidate?
Well, so here's the thing, right? When he was with the Bucs, they had a top 10 rated offense with Jameis Winston and Ryan Fitzpatrick. That wasn't all on him when he got let go, right? The whole coaching staff.
Fair point.
So
fair point. Yeah, it's a fantastic counter, Robbie. You know, I will admit I've not done as much homework on Todd Monken, but
it's just another name to throw out there. I know
Yeah.
a lot of Ben Johnsons, Brian Callahan, you know, all these guys get talked about a lot. It's just another name to throw out there in the mix, you know.
Absolutely, and rightly so. The reason why I focused on Ben Johnson and McDonald a bit more than some of the others is the thing that impresses me both about those two is that they have had a lot of success without, you know, any star players, though. You know, it's the fact that when you actually look, the reason I focus most on Ben Johnson is because I just see translatable results. Like he's done, this is what he's done with Jared Goff. And I look at Geno Smith and go, well, he could do that with Geno Smith. Or if they draft somebody, whatever. But if Geno Smith is the starter next year, then you could get production out of him because he's had production with Goff. I look at what he's done with Amon-Ra St. Brown and don't think there's any reason why he can't do that with the receivers here. He's had great success with a tight end, a rookie tight end. And if the Seahawks are going to have to draft a tight end or find the tight end from somewhere this offseason, or if they've managed to get Noah Fant back, then Green Bay have just scored another touchdown, by the way. So it's looking like that game is done. Dallas out in the wild card round.
Yeah,
So,
and let me just jump in real fast, Rob. I'm not saying I don't want Ben Johnson by any means. I think he's number one for me, just like Adam. I don't know if he's 1, 2, 3 for me, but he's 1, and then Brian Callahan I think is 2 for me. I think Mike McDonald would be 3 for me in that order. But I just wanted to throw him out and get your guys' opinions on it, really.
Absolutely, Robbie. Keep doing it. You know, and I'd like to come back to you and ask you a bit more about your list as we go along. Just to finish the point on Johnson, his running back scored 23 touchdowns this season. 23. And they have 2. So they have David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs. And you're thinking, well, if he can get that out of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, he could perhaps get that out of Ken Walker and Zach Charbonnet. They could play similar roles as to the 2 that he's had in Detroit. So I look at all of that and think, well, you know, if you plonk Ben Johnson in Seattle's offense, there's a chance to be good this year. You know, the Lions don't have an amazing defense. They have Aiden Hutchinson, a few complementary pieces, and not a lot else. So if you could get a defense that is complementary, and if he could translate his results from Detroit to the Seahawks, he's playing in a tougher division than the NFC North this year. But there is a chance there to maybe win 10, 11, 12 games with an easier schedule and actually have things motoring forward again, as opposed to having to go through a big reset and rebuild. And I just think that there is something about Ben Johnson that just gives me a feeling that I do legitimately feel like within a couple of years, he could be viewed at least on a par with McVay and Shanahan, if not getting ahead of them. So that's why I really want him. But it does look as if it's almost a done deal that he is, when Mike Garofalo mentioned that he has been talking to Adam Peters about coming together and working in Washington, and then you see the reports when Peters was appointed that Ben Johnson is the favorite to be the Commanders head coach, you almost wonder if that's just a done deal, that whenever Detroit are eliminated, this could be quite a quick fix this. I don't know if Washington have already interviewed candidates that fit the Rooney rule, but if they have, it could be as simple as the minute Detroit are out, a few days later, Ben Johnson is announced as the Commanders head coach, and there's nothing you can do about it. But if they want Ben Johnson, and I hope that they do, and I hope they get a chance to sort of try and convince him to come to Seattle, get the checkbook out, because you're going to need it, because it's going to cost you an awful lot. He is the belle of the ball, as I think Garofalo put it on KJR this week. He's the one that, out of all of the candidates, that people want the most, and he is the one that I'd love to see the Seahawks flex a little bit and go and get. So we will see. And then just the point I was making is Mike McDonald has really succeeded in Baltimore without an elite pass rusher. You know, Dan Quinn's done it with Micah Parsons. So he's had a lot of success there bringing a group together, which is very interesting in my opinion. But the only problem with Mike McDonald is he just has such a limited background. How is he going to be able to build a staff, especially if Jim Harbaugh is going to be taking all the Michigan guys, and if John Harbaugh is going to be promoting internally, if he loses people like Mike McDonald, you wonder where he's going to get his staff from. So that would be my concern there. And then I suppose, Adam, that means you have to, if Ben Johnson does go somewhere else, how would you feel about that? You know, do you think the Commanders really are that attractive? Obviously, they've got new owners. They've got a very good GM now. It's a different team. They've got a very high draft pick. Is that more appealing than Seattle, because it's still crappy facilities, crappy stadium. That's not going to be fixed overnight.
I always wildly misread the mindset of people that work in sport, because for me in the NFL, you wouldn't want to be the highest paid quarterback, because why would you want that pressure? But every quarterback seems to do it, outside of the fact that obviously it's more money, but they're all rich anyway. And stuff like that. The Seahawk job for me, if it was, I guess the only thing that you could maybe dissuade someone is that there's going to be probably a lot more pressure on it because of the run that we've been on and this perception of competitiveness and being in and amongst it, that there'll be a lot of Seahawk fans that if it doesn't work out from an early time, will be saying, Pete Carroll, never, didn't have many losing records, and we were always in the playoffs, we're always competitive, and it was much worse now than it was with Pete. We should have, and I wonder if maybe with and obviously we know that's rubbish, but you know that will happen. Whereas maybe with the Commanders, you do have a bit more breathing space because, it's a new quarterback. It's, the expectations are just rock bottom, let's be honest. Whereas here, the level of expectation might dissuade someone. But then you think about all these guys that have got egos that are the size of houses. Maybe he would relish the challenge. And I hope that the head coach of the Seahawks will relish that challenge, because it is potentially a fantastic job to have. And it's right there. And there's still loads of talent on this roster that if you can harness it. I mean, think how badly we generally felt we played this season. And we were, a couple of field goals away from playing tonight. So, the foundations are there if a coach comes in and can get things moving quickly.
It's money talks, obviously, doesn't it? And, a new ownership group that's just come in, they could generate a bit of excitement. And I don't know how well Ben Johnson and Adam Peters might be as thick as thieves. They might just really get on. But there's just something about that franchise. There's already, even the name, the Washington Commanders, it's a crap name. It's a really bad name. They're already talking about changing that. There's no real, because they've had to change the name. It doesn't feel like much of a franchise. It just feels like a wishy-washy franchise that's kind of buried in the NFC East. And if they are going to have to change identity again, and if they are going to have to rebuild build a new stadium and get all the facilities sorted over time, it feels to me a little bit like, would you want to go through all that as the big hot coaching candidate, especially if the money is similar? So I don't know. We'll see on Ben Johnson and the Commanders. There is one other thing that I wanted to raise with you guys, which I don't know how you feel about this, Robbie. The thing I wrote about today. There are very few defensive coordinator candidates out there that are obvious to support, let's say, a young offensive-minded head coach. So let's say they do go for a Ben Johnson or a Bobby Slowick or somebody like that. Last year, you could have gone for Vic Fangio to place with them, or Brian Flores, or Steve Wilkes, or, God, there's a whole bunch more. Avero ended up in Carolina, Vance Joseph. There's one or two others as well. There was a long list of very experienced defensive coaches who could essentially be, to a young offensive mind, what Wade Phillips was to Sean McVay when he took the Rams job. This year, there's basically Brandon Staley, and that's it. Whereas if you do appoint a McDonald or a Quinn, you could theoretically appoint Kellen Moore, Eric Bieniemy, Josh McDaniels. I don't know. There are offensive coaches out there who have been there, done it, been around the block, who are a name. So does that shape your thinking at all, Robbie? How concerning would it be that if you go for a very inexperienced defensive-minded coach, that there might not be a surefire mentor/defensive coach to come in and work with them?
Well, I think it'd be very arrogant of me to say that I know all the coordinators on the team. So, there may be an up and coming guy that, is under someone like a Mike McDaniel that could have a chance to come in and be a DC. I mean, would you have ever thought Clint Hurt was going to be the defensive coordinator? I mean, I don't think I would have ever picked him as a guy. So there's an opportunity, depending on, again, where they're coming from. Say you get, Bobby Slowick, and then, who is there that's underneath them that could be a decent defensive coordinator that, that we're just not knowing about. So I think there's opportunities could be from the college ranks. It could be from the NFL. I'm not really sure, but I'm guessing there are going to be people.
I just wonder as well, given the way that this Cowboys game is going, because all the rumor is that Belichick could be interested in the Cowboys. That if this the talk was that if it goes badly, McCarthy will get fired. Well, it's gone badly. So he looks like he's going to be fired. And then initially the talk was, well, Dan Quinn could get the job, but it's gone so badly that I can't see Jerry Jones going, yeah, we're going to get rid of McCarthy and promote Dan Quinn. And now all of the talk is like Rich Eisen's tweeting about it, Mike Florio's tweeting about it. Everyone's putting the Belichick gif where he's like sat at the combine eating the snacks and the binoculars come out. I've seen that 100 times already. So if Belichick goes to Dallas, guys, Dan Quinn's going to be out of a job because Dan Quinn's not going to be Belichick's defensive coordinator. So if Dan Quinn doesn't get a head coaching job, theoretically, you might be able to appoint him as defensive coordinator if he wants to be employed next year. So there's still quite a lot and there's all sorts going on. There's talk that Andy Reid might retire. If that happens, good luck convincing any offensive coach to come to Seattle if he's got a chance to work with Patrick Mahomes. There's all sorts doing around. Sirianni could go with the Eagles. There was another rumor that it's not. Look, last week was a weird week where in 24 hours, Carroll, Saban, and Belichick all left their jobs. Would it be that preposterous if we found out this week that Miami has decided, actually, we were really disappointed with the way that season ended? Mike McDaniel, you're getting the shepherd's crook. Would it be that surprising if Kevin Stefanski turned around to the Browns and said, I've got 1 year left on my contract. I am done. I'm done with the ownership. I'm done with the drama. I'm done with Deshaun Watson's horrendous contract, which is going to cripple this team for the next few years. I've got 1 year left. Let me go. Let me go. Fire me. Work a trade out. Let me go. I mean, I'm just saying, I think I still think there are some things to be played out here, and there could be developments. And that could be one of the reasons why the Seahawks are not exactly throwing themselves into this search and announcing who they're interviewing. Because I think just taking a step back and waiting until next week, we might find that there's a completely different complexion to this. While all the other teams are rushing around interviewing people on Zoom, I think maybe just taking your time might be a good thing for the Seahawks. Robbie, can I come back to your list? Can you just give us, who were your main candidates again? So you said, did you say Johnson first?
Yeah, I go with Johnson, Callahan, and then I don't know why I slipped it, but Slowick would be next, and then probably Mike McDaniel.
Callahan's a really interesting one. Do you know what?
I really like him. I really like him.
But one thing I found quite interesting with him was this had never happened in Seattle, or maybe it would if he was the coach. Do you know all the teams have like locked on podcasts? So the one in Cincinnati, he appeared on that and did a 2-part podcast where the two guys who host that, who by all accounts just look like two guys in their front rooms, were just going, why is the offense not really working, Brian? And they were like really grilling him on stuff. Like one person said, offensive production's down across the league. Why do you think that is, Brian? And they're asking that to the offensive coordinator. It was really interesting. And he just answered everything. And it was as if it was just a bunch of guys like we are having a conversation. He was the offensive coordinator for the Cincinnati Bengals. So it was really, and to one extent, I thought, wow, kudos to him for doing that. And it gave you some real insight into what was happening with Cincinnati. But it also gave you a chance to sort of learn what he's about, Robbie. And he is somebody who has worked with Peyton Manning and has had some, he's an NFL lifer, isn't he? I mean, his dad's Bill Callahan, who's possibly the best defensive line coach in the league and might come with his son if you manage to get him to Seattle. But are you concerned at all that he hasn't called plays? Because he's never done that.
No, because he still has to hire an offensive coordinator, someone that would come in and probably help him with that. He's probably helping with play calling as well. So I'm not super worried about it. Is there some concern? For sure, but he's not someone that I would be overly concerned about. He's been around the NFL, like you said, for a really long time. So I don't think it's foreign to him.
No. And there are some people who you think, well, he's been in the game so long that they might be able to work this one out. But perhaps, that offensive coordinator hire could be important, who he teams himself with if he indeed gets a job. There are some other names that I kind of wanted to chuck out there. Can we, actually, before I get into that, I'll do the super chats and I've got a question for Adam. And then and Adam's going to explode when I ask this. So get ready for that. This is from Matt. He knows where I'm going. Matt says it will probably be sooner, but could we view February 16th, when Gino's contract becomes guaranteed for 2024, as an unofficial deadline for hiring a coach? No, I suspect the Seahawks will have a coach just before the Super Bowl, unless or we will know who it's going to be by the Super Bowl. That's my sort of time frame on this. So either it'll be somebody who's still coaching in the Super Bowl and everybody knows they're going to get it when the Super Bowl's finished, or it will be done before that. That's kind of what I think. I think Gino's contract is more interesting now, though. I think if Pete Carroll was still here, it'd be an absolute nailed-on cert that Geno Smith will be staying and they'd restructure the contract. Now, I don't know how likely it is. I've heard a couple of whispers, like people saying that they're going to save money by getting rid of the two safeties now, and that they'll rework DK's contract a little bit and stuff like that to create money. Nothing was said on Geno Smith. So I and also, fellas, if you want to draft a quarterback, you have to have a quarterback on your roster to not tip your hand. So I still think it's probably more likely that Geno will have a contract restructure and will be seen as a bridge rather than an outright cutting. That would be the scenario that I think is most likely, Matt. So yeah, that's the kind of time frame that I'm going on. Jack says, what are your thoughts on Dave Canales? Love the show. Thank you, Jack. Thank you for the super chat and for the question. For me, fellas, I want to move on. I think Canales is only being linked really because he's been here before. He did he did a decent job at Tampa Bay, but 1 year as a coordinator and doing a decent job when you've got people like Mike Evans and Goodwin and people like that, and not playing in a great division either, than the NFC South. I personally want to aim a little bit higher than that for the next head coach. And I also want a clean break from the Carroll era. I don't want a guy who worked with Carroll for years and then just went away for 1 year and then comes back to replace Carroll. I want a clean break. But have you got any thoughts, you two, on Adam, first of all, on Canales? Meh, is that it?
Yeah. Really?
Meh.
What's the point? What's the point? Would be my thought on that one. And apparently I don't believe he's meant to be the most inspirational, exciting bloke either, from what I've read. Now, that's hearsay. But that's can I surprise you, Adam? I've watched a few of his press conferences. Never. I don't believe a word of it.
He's fine. He seems like a nice guy, but you don't think, whoa, this is McVay 2.0. He's just a decent guy. So yeah. Robbie, have you got any thoughts on Canales?
I'm gonna go with Adams. Meh.
Yeah. Meh. Nah. Thanks, Louis, for the super chat. He sent another one in as well with a question. Thoughts on David Shaw, Harbaugh disciple? I think David Shaw's essentially retired at this point, hasn't he? He was at Stanford for a long time. He always declined the overtures from the NFL, and he's not gone back into the league, has he? He's kind of doing a bit of media every now and again. I just don't think he's got the appetite for it. So I don't think David Shaw is. I just can't see John Schneider appointing someone like David Shaw either. Keep your super chats coming in. Not only do they help support the channel, but if you have a question, then it's the best way to get it answered. Right, I promised a spicy meatball for Adam, and it's not actually going to be as bad as he thinks, because it's not a provocative question. There isn't a day goes by, Adam, that somebody doesn't either send me a comment on the blog or on the YouTube channel or a tweet saying, stop talking about everybody else and just get Jim Harbaugh in. Just get him in Seattle. What would your response be to that?
Outside of Ange Postecoglou doing a reverse Ted Lasso and becoming an NFL head coach after being a soccer coach, there's genuinely no one I would less rather have than Jim Harbaugh. And here's my reasoning, and no one has to go along with this, but here's my reasoning as someone that has seen this sort of thing happen in the flesh twice. So I love the Seahawks, but my heart belongs to another, and that's Tottenham Hotspur. It's a different sport, different country.
Who?
Yeah. We don't need to go there when soccer teams roll. But anyway, we'll continue. I have witnessed Tottenham sack some legendary managers in the past and look around at what is defined as a winner. And he's a winner. And, you know, you get this guy in and he's a winner. But the problem with these winners, and it's almost comparable situation with two managers that Spurs have had, that yes, they might win, but everyone knows that in 3 or 4 years' time, something's going to blow up and it's all going to go to hell in a handcart or whatever the phrase is. And I do not want a manager coming in, particularly from your rivals, which again just leaves me cold. Like you are what you are, and I don't think you mess with the other side. It's just not. It doesn't seem right. But I promise you, if you go chasing the short-term winner, knowing for a fact that if it goes well, if it goes badly, in 3 or 4 years' time, you are going to be knackered in a situation that you're desperate to get out of. I promise you, steer clear from that with a 10,000 foot pole. Do not touch it, because for any short-term highs you think you might get, I promise you, it knackers you long-term, and that is just not worth it.
You know, as you were speaking, though, I was trying to think, because I want to play devil's advocate, and I was trying to think of an example within the sport that is the national sport where you and I live, Adam, where perhaps you were scarred by your experiences as a Spurs fan. Maybe there was another team that had gone down this path and had actually enjoyed great success as a consequence. And I'm trying to think of somebody, and I am struggling, I have to say. I can't. There's nobody off at the top of my head. I was trying to think who Real Madrid appointed and Barcelona and Bayern Munich. Is there any example out there where a really unpopular, and all I can think of are stuff like Rafa Benitez at Everton and stuff like that, and where it hasn't worked, you know. And so as much as I wanted to play devil's advocate with you, I can't think of any, you know, counters to what you just said there.
It just doesn't work. And I know it's alluring and you think they've changed and you think it can work, but I promise you, look, and maybe the two sports don't, you know, there's not as much of a comparison, but this is a human element more than a sporting thing. And I really think that it's, you're playing with fire.
Let me push back just for the sake, because there are going to be people watching this who are, you know, all in on Harbaugh. So I want to represent their views and get your response. And Robbie, you know, give us a thought in a second as well on Harbaugh. So as much as I have sympathy with your point of view that, you know, if you go chasing the quote unquote winner, that, you know, and he is a short-term appointment. You were not appointing Jim Harbaugh to be here for 10 years. You're appointing him to be here for 4 or 5. You get the Harbaugh effect, and then he annoys everybody, and you can't wait to kick him out the door. And I don't think I think that there's any chance it's going to happen either, by the way, because John Schneider has been waiting 14 years to have control over this roster. There is absolutely no way his first big move, having got control over not just the roster, but everything. He's in charge of football operations. There's no way that his first move is going to appoint the one guy on the planet who will argue over every freaking decision that he ever makes. If John goes out and buys a soft drink, Jim Harbaugh will walk in and go, why did you buy that one? Like, he will argue over everything. He will be a pain in the arse for John Schneider to deal with. So this isn't happening. There's no way. Like, if you wanted Harbaugh, you had to hope that they were going to fire Schneider and then the ownership would go all in on Jim Harbaugh. John Schneider, I feel 99.9% confident on this, will not appoint Jim Harbaugh. And he's not even being linked to the Seahawks, which says it all. And if they wanted him, they could go and talk to him now. They don't have to wait. They could interview him in person. He's not even being linked. It ain't happening. It's never going to happen. So Adam can rest easy. But the point is, Adam, for those who do want him, he has won everywhere. He has taken over teams like Stanford, who are soft as anything. They are soft. The only time Stanford hasn't been soft in my lifetime is when they had Harbaugh as head coach. He's gone to San Francisco, annual underachievers, and turned them into a powerhouse. He's gone to Michigan, a team that's going absolutely nowhere, and has turned them into national champions. So there is evidence of him producing a hard-nosed, tough, physical, successful football team wherever he's gone. And the one thing about Harbaugh is he will scare the crap out of the Niners. They will not want to face him twice a year. He will terrify them. He will be especially motivated to beat the 49ers every single time that he plays the Niners. And he is talented enough as a coach, as much as he might be a bit of a weirdo, he is talented enough as a coach to potentially be somebody who you could say is better than McVay and Shanahan on pure talent alone in what he's given his results, or he could be of their ilk. So that is what I think people would say. And I don't think he's going to, I'm more aligned with your thinking than theirs, but that's what people would say. So can you give us a response to those counters?
Me or Rob, do you want me to take that? Look, yes, there's no denying. But again, this is that sort of people become winners because they've won, like that they get that moniker because they have been hugely successful. My thought, and perhaps this is way wide of the mark, that I think that the Harbaugh shtick now would work very well for college players, albeit in an NIL situation of whipping into a frenzy, that kind of Michigan, Ann Arbor attitude of, one team in town, everyone is just obsessed with this team, and it's college kids that are looking to make it. I can't see that his way doesn't rub NFL players up the wrong way in 2024. Maybe I'm wide of the mark, but after for all of our criticisms of Pete Carroll, we know that the way in which he empowered his players and created, an environment where his players could flourish from a personal level, it does matter. And I don't know. You can just see in 18 months' time leaks to Glazer and Schefter that these guys aren't enjoying practices and because they're millionaires now and they don't need to be motivated in the same way. So that would be my comeback to that. I think Harbaugh is fantastic in what he does in college, but I'm not sure that's going to translate personality wise to the pros again.
So, Robbie, before I bring you in for the thought on Harbaugh, I just looked up at the screen and saw a Green Bay player that was so open, a tight end, that if I was that tight end, I would have scored that touchdown. That he had enough time to pull out a bag from the bleachers, run back onto the field, establish his feet back in the field of play, catch the ball in the bag, swing it around his head, do a griddy, and walk into the end zone. He was that wide open. And the Packers have scored 41 points. Now, there is a pick six involved in that. But here's some of the stats. And there's still a quarter of the game to go. It's 41-16. And Green Bay have, with a quarter to go, 367 yards, 9.4 yards per play, and 4.7 yards per run. You are going to have a hard time selling this to Seahawks fans if you are going to appoint Dan Quinn. I'm sorry. Like, you can't judge a candidate. Like, if Ben Johnson's Detroit Lions crap the bed tonight, in the same way, I don't think you can judge either coach on one game. But, Robbie, that is not a good look. It's going to be really hard for the Seahawks to go, look what we've done, guys. We've appointed this after watching that defense last year. This is not supposed to look this way on defense if you're going to appoint that guy as your head coach.
Yeah, and I think this is probably, if I had to guess, I think they're gonna pin this on McCarthy, and he's gonna get canned, and then Jerry will do what he can to keep Dan Quinn, which would be perfect for us because I don't think we want him here. So I think that's probably what's gonna happen. And I know, like Michael Parsons, he's a big Dan Quinn fan. So if he has players like Max Crosby, who is advocating for Antonio Pierce, same thing. Maybe there's a chance that he ends up just staying the head coach for the Cowboys. I think it's going to follow McCarthy and he's going to get let go. But yeah, this is an ass whooping by the Packers. I have it on the screen over here. I'm watching.
Not bad, but incredible. And embarrassing for the Cowboys. Robbie, Jim Harbaugh. So we've all got Adam's. Oh, straight in there.
Listen, I fall.
Explain why.
I fall onto that. I hated Harbaugh for so long that I have a hard time wrapping my mind around him being a Seahawks head coach. I just can't. I know he wins wherever he goes. I get that. I just don't like the guy. Simple as that.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people will agree with you. But
I think that's really valid as well, by the way. Sorry for interrupting. Like, it is sport. Sport is supposed to be fun, and it's, your release, and it's where your emotions take you. It's really hard to start loving a guy who you have hated. You can't just turn it on and off like a tap. And again, through lived experience, I promise you that will cause huge divisions in the fan base, because there'll be some that will not be able to stomach him under any circumstances. And honestly, there is nothing worse than a split fan base.
I agree.
Like that.
I disagree with. I agree with that, but I disagree with the other point. I do think there will be some people who turn it off and on like a tap. If the Seahawks start winning, I think a lot of people will just go, "Well, we're winning," and I want a winning team. I do think.
Yeah, but he's going to have to win, and he's going to have to win a lot. I think to Adam's point, he's going to have to win a lot. Some of those people to switch.
But I tell you what, if the Seahawks were like 10-2 in his first season, coming towards the end of the year, I think a lot of people would be like, "Yeah, do you know what? We're winning. We're now looking strong," and I do think there would be a lot of that. So I agree with a lot of the points you've made, but I don't think I think there'd be a lot less resistance than you think if the Seahawks win it. Now, if they weren't, it's the opposite. Like if they were 6-6, then people would go, "What the hell were they doing appointing him?" The arch enemy of Carroll has come in, and the hated Jim Harbaugh, and he's 6-6. That would really sort of drive a lot of negativity and toxicity. But if they were winning, I do think winning cause a lot of ills. So we'll see. But he's not going to beat him anyway. It's not that if there was any chance, it would have been mentioned. Now he's going to go and have a conversation. It seems the only team that's really interested in him is the Chargers and the Raiders, and the Raiders seem to be being given a full court press by Max Crosby to appoint Antonio Pierce. So it looks as if he's going to stay as the Raiders coach, and Jim Harbaugh will end up with the Chargers. That's the way that it seems to be drifting. Right. We've got a few more super chats. Keep those coming in, because we're not going to be on for much longer. Some sort of left field suggestions here, guys, because there's not sort of 5 candidates who are offensive-minded coaches who, everybody's talking about. So at the minute, I'd be very happy with Ben Johnson or Bobby Slowick or Mike McDonald. I've written the article I have about Dan Quinn. I obviously wrote that before this disaster zone. I have to say this is influencing me somewhat, but at the same time, I stand by a lot of some of the other, the positive things of Quinn that I wrote in the article. But those are the 3 that I'm kind of focused on: Johnson, Slowick. Slowick to me just has got that. He's got that McVay factor. He's kind of got that personality. I think he's very, very impressive, and what he's done with CJ Stroud is incredible. So we're seeing Matt LaFleur for the Packers here. Nobody talks about Mike LaFleur. Now, there might be a reason for that, because he went to the Jets, and as a Jets fan tweeted to me tonight, he had a shocking time as the Jets coordinator, but he had to work with Zach Wilson. And we all know that Zach Wilson now is awful. He didn't have Aaron Rodgers or anybody else. He had Zach Wilson. So is it fair to judge him on that? Mike LaFleur is very similar personality-wise to McVay, speaks in a very similar way. McVay waxes lyrical about him and speaks very positively about him. There's an article in The Athletic saying that he has given LaFleur responsibilities that he never gave Waldron or O'Connell or anybody else who's worked under him before. He's been really impressed with LaFleur, and he let LaFleur call plays in the Week 18 game against San Francisco when all the backups were in. So he gave him that experience of calling plays for the Rams. It goes to show that he's very impressed by LaFleur. This is a coach who has worked for Shanahan and McVay. Like I say, he speaks very, very confidently and with intelligence. He's very offensive-minded. And his brother has done a great job in Green Bay. That doesn't automatically mean that he's going to be a great head coach as well. But you're just watching one LaFleur and you think, well, maybe the other LaFleur is worth a shout. But he hasn't got any head coaching interview requests right now for whatever reason. I don't know if the stench of that Jets failure is stuck on him. But what do we think, guys? Because I think he's a fascinating candidate, and I'd be interested in speaking to him, because practically everybody who works with McVay has gone on to have success. O'Connell, Zach Taylor, LaFleur. Am I missing anybody else? It's just a continued run of success, isn't it, Robbie? I mean, it worked. McVay guys seem to work out.
Yeah, he's one of those dark horses that not a lot of people are talking about that could come in, interview, that just doesn't get a lot of publicity or buzz, and then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, he's the head coach. It wouldn't surprise me. He's a name to keep an eye on for sure.
Adam, is that sort of, am I convincing you at all with that as a name? Obviously, we're not going into the tall grass here of really analysing what he does or what he's going to bring or anything like that. But I think McVay disciple, when it seems similar in terms of personality and intelligence, has obviously worked with Shanahan and McVay, and they are the two hotshot coaches who seem to be not just producing great offenses, but also producing great coaches who go on to be head coaches.
It's not just that. I mean, I think you're right. I have no opinion because you can't have an opinion on every guy, obviously. But in thinking about it, and maybe this is a quick brainstorm exercise we can do with people in the comments as well. But how many coordinators that become head coaches for the first time haven't done well in the last 5 or 6 years?
God, that is a good question.
Obviously, Robert Saleh hasn't had a great time of it, but you could maybe make excuses for him given quarterback situation. But I'm just trying to obviously, and McDaniels, I don't think you can count because obviously he was at Denver in the past. But I'm just thinking of all the guys that were coordinators that become head coaches, I'm pretty sure every one of them has improved their team somewhat off the top of my head.
So I'm having a look here. So the Bills obviously haven't appointed anybody recently. Sean McDermott's been there a while. Mike McDaniel obviously flopped last night, but I think for the most part has had a positive impact on the Dolphins. Robert Saleh's struggled, but not defensively. His defenses are consistent in the top 5. It's the offense that's a shambles. Baltimore obviously had Harbaugh for a long time. Cleveland Browns, Kevin Stefanski was a coordinator for less than a year in Minnesota. Less than a year. He basically came in as an interim coordinator halfway through the season and then parlayed that into the job in Cleveland. There's been a revelation. He's going to be coach of the year twice. He's taken the Browns to the playoffs twice when they never get there. They've qualified for the playoffs 3 times since 1999, and he's done it twice. Zach Taylor took the Bengals to the Super Bowl. Houston are having success currently. Jacksonville, Doug Peterson, slightly different because he'd been a head coach. Indianapolis went 9-8 with essentially an offensive coordinator getting a promotion.
And a backup quarterback, basically, all year.
Yep. Andy Reid, obviously, at Chiefs is different. Broncos, different. Sean Payton. Brandon Staley did not work out. That's one. Sirianni, it's falling apart currently, but he took them to a Super Bowl and they nearly won. Brian Daboll, mixed, isn't it? I mean, obviously, it's a crap situation there with the injuries and the players they've got and spending all that money on Daniel Jones. But at the same time,
they were happy after year 1.
They were. The other thing, I suppose, is it sounds like he's an absolute arse to deal with. So there's that, I guess. Minnesota, I think Kevin O'Connell to be 7-10 this year it's a minor miracle, frankly, given that they've had about 10 quarterbacks. So he's a success. Chicago have not had a great deal of success with their defensive coordinator turned coach. Tampa Bay, they're on a retread head coach, as are the Saints. Falcons, Arthur Smith didn't work out.
Was this his first job?
Yeah, it's his first head coach job. Carolina with Frank Reich. Kyle Shanahan, it was his first head coaching job, and he's been a revelation. Same as Sean McVay. And Jonathan Gannon did okay in year 1. So generally speaking, Adam, you've for the most part, these first-time coordinators who do get opportunities have not done too badly in terms of their side of the ball. I suppose the lesson is that you still have to come up with a team. Like if you go for Robert Saleh, he's only going to be as good as who his offensive coordinator and quarterback are going to be. So if you go defense, that's what you've got to be mindful of. And I suppose if you go with, let's say, Slowick, you can't trot out a crap defense. You're going to have to trot out at least a complementary defense to do it. But that is interesting there. But does that encourage you at all, Robbie, that, if they do go for a first-time coordinator? Because there's a lot of fans. Listen, I've watched podcasts this week or streams that I often wouldn't bother watching. But I've watched them just to get a flavour for what people are saying. And I've been really surprised, and this on Twitter as well, by how many people are moaning and complaining and are already sort of pointing the finger at well, I guess, streams like ours and going, you asked for this, you're going to have to own it when it goes wrong. Oh, God, my word. Like, it had already gone wrong. The Seahawks weren't going anywhere. And this might not work out, but I think it was worth the risk to get better, to get, the threat of getting worse for the promise of getting better was worth taking this chance, because I just don't think we were going anywhere with Pete Carroll. But Robbie, when I read that sort of list out, does that encourage you that actually, often going for the coordinator and giving them the opportunity, that generally speaking, the coaches have done okay?
Yeah, I think it's nice to actually hear that. And like, I would rather have someone that's new at head coaching than kind of a retread, second chance head coach, these Steve Wilkes and, Brian Flores and Vance Joseph and Raheem Morris and all these other guys, Dan Quinn, all these other guys that have had opportunities to be head coaches and failed. I'd rather give someone an opportunity to come in, lead the charge, and give them an opportunity to succeed without having to, have a second chance, head coach. I want someone who's going to come in with fresh eyes, like when we hired Pete Carroll. Granted, Pete Carroll had been fired by the Jets, but it had been quite some time since that had happened. But I just want something different with some fresh eyes.
Absolutely. Some other names that I would sort of throw out there, other than Mike LaFleur, obviously we mentioned Callahan. I think Mike Kafka is somebody who's been receiving interview requests. He's the offensive coordinator of the New York Giants. I will warn you now, guys, he is not the most interesting person to listen to. But he is somebody who has been fast-tracked a little bit. He was a quarterback drafted by Andy Reid in the Eagles back in the day. He had a bit of a journeyman career as a backup, and then went into coaching at Northwestern, which is where he went to college. So obviously Northwestern guy, he's intelligent. And then he went from Northwestern to the Chiefs and was long seen as the heir apparent to Eric Bieniemy. So that the thought was Bieniemy will get a head coaching job. Kafka will become the offensive coordinator. Of course, as we now know, Bieniemy never got a head coaching job. And because every year he was overlooked as a head coach, Kafka was then offered the chance to go to the Giants. He did, to become the offensive coordinator there instead under Daboll, who he had a relationship with because he played for New England when Daboll was there. So that's why he went to New York. And then a year later, Bieniemy goes and takes the commander's job. So if Kafka had just waited one more year, he would have been the offensive coordinator with the Chiefs right now, as opposed to being the offensive coordinator with the Giants. And as a consequence, may well have been getting more head coaching buzz than he is with the Giants. However, I think he will, if he's getting interviews, I think the Seahawks will interview him. And he's, like I say, he's not the most interesting person to speak to, but he is highly regarded by Andy Reid and people like that as I think the Packers just scored again. It's 47-16. My goodness, what's going on? Anyway, a digression. Like I said, not the most interesting guy. He isn't going to win the press conference. Let's put it that way. He gives you a good chance to go, well, that wasn't a very inspiring opening press conference, but is well known for how he helped Patrick Mahomes when he was coming in. He's worked with Mahomes. We know that Schneider likes that type of quarterback, big arm, drive it downfield. And if I'm being honest, guys, I think I think Schneider's going to want an offense like Andy Reid's, perhaps more than Kyle Shanahan's. And I wonder if for that reason, Kafka could be the dark horse candidate. But he is the polar opposite of Pete Carroll as a personality. I mean, how would you feel about that, Adam? How would you feel if it was a bit of an unknown and you sat there, you're listening on YouTube to the first press conference, and you just thought, because I can tell, I've seen some of Ange Postecoglou's clips they're all over Twitter, right? You can't help be entertained by the chap. And that helps. If you like the guy, if you're interested in hearing him, it helps you buy in, and the love affair begins with the coach. if you're listening to the coach and you don't have a game for 6 months, and what you're hearing is slightly monotonous and dull, it's quite hard to generate excitement from that. So how will you feel about it?
Yeah, I mean, you want to be carried along with the ride, don't you? I mean, you want to start feeling internally that what you're watching has a direction, there's an ambition to it, and there is a point where you want to be inspired by your head coach. We can't physically do it, but there's times where we've stayed up. We stay up to 5 a.m. to watch the Seahawks. We metaphorically would run through brick walls for Pete Carroll for a number of years as fans, and that's all part of it, right? Like that makes you feel so much more in tune and with your team, that you can you feel like you're on the roster almost, in the sense of the guy feels like he's speaking to you, and I think you do want that. Now, obviously, it doesn't preclude a guy from being a good coach. I mean, there's plenty of head coaches out there that are dull as ditchwater, but they've done a good job. But yeah, I think certainly from that first press conference of the new head coach is going to be a really exciting time for all of us, and we'll have the stream button ready to go to talk about it straight away. So to that end, I think you would like to be excited by it, but I don't think it's it's not it's not a deal breaker from minute one, I don't think.
Robbie, the other issue here is, whilst the McVay coaching tree has been extremely successful, the development of coaches going from McVay's system into head coaching jobs and having success is top notch. The run of coaches going from Andy Reid's tree is not as good. So Frank Reich has struggled. Doug Peterson won a Super Bowl, but has otherwise struggled. He got fired shortly after the Super Bowl. Matt Nagy failed in Chicago. Is there anybody else? It's not a great. It's not automatic, really, that Andy Reid guys are going to fly into the league and lead and be brilliant. So again, I suppose that might be the way that Schneider wants to go, for that style of offense. But I have to say, Robbie, I'm sort of talking myself more into the Shanahan and McVay tree, because that is where there's been a lot more translation of successful coach coordinator to head coach under McVay and Shanahan.
Yeah, when you start looking at our coaching trees, it sure does make a lot of sense if you start looking at one that's more successful. I mean, I think the same thing can be said about Pete Carroll's tree and looking at Dan Quinn and Robert Saleh and all these other guys. I mean, they're not super successful right now. And if you're going to look at it, if you're going to take that into consideration, that's something that you should definitely look at. So, I mean, it's hard to blame a guy though just for being on a certain tree. He might have different thought process, different ideas, but it's something to discuss. And I think that's going to be something that would be, considered when interviewing for sure.
Guys, let me know in the private chat how long you can stick around for. I don't want to keep you too long, and I know we've done well over an hour already. So just let me know, and because I don't want to keep you against your will and like prisoners, chatting about the Seahawks here. So just let me know. But there are sort of a couple of things I do want to run through. Yeah, other candidates, I suppose you could say, like if Joe Brady's had a very good spell since taking over with the Bills as offensive coordinator. Now, Joe Brady was the coach who was the offensive coordinator for LSU when Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson and Clyde Edwards-Helaire won a national championship, won every game by about 100 points. And it was the greatest college football season I think we will ever see from LSU that year. Now, I've just reeled off some elite talent that he has had to work with. He obviously benefited from that, but still had to make best use of it, which he did. And then he got the Carolina Panthers job, failed there. We've since discovered that the Panthers job is a bit of a poison chalice in any way whatsoever, because it's a trash franchise at the moment. He has gone to Buffalo to try and rebuild his career and has done very well since taking over as the Bills offensive coordinator. I just wonder, Robbie, whether he could be a left field candidate here, somebody who is worth having a conversation with, somebody who is bright, is young, is offensive minded. He used to work with Sean Payton. He has got some league experience now. And, in the same way that Kevin Stefanski only had a very short period of success with the Vikings and then became a head coach, is Joe Brady somebody that, might be worth having over for an interview?
Yeah, I mean, it's someone that you should bring in and talk. I mean, a lot of these guys that you're bringing up with guys that I kind of forgot about, like Joe Brady, and that's a really good example of someone who has an opportunity to come in and could really make this team special. You look around and obviously some of these top guys. I honestly don't think Johnson's coming here. I just don't. I think Commanders is the job he's going to take, but someone like Bobby Slowick or some of these other guys, you have to wonder why Commanders would be more appealing. Maybe higher draft pick, but it's still a crap franchise and always has been. But you start talking about guys like Joe Brady, and I just wonder what John Snyder has up his sleeve, because if what Pete had said he's been thinking about, or whatever, I read something about, I wasn't Pete who said it, but he's been thinking about it for the last 3 months or something. I'm sure he's been thinking about it for longer, but he's probably got a good idea, a list of people that he wants to bring in. And I just kind of keep refreshing that Twitter feed to see, Seahawks interviewing so-and-so that where everyone's going to be like, what?
I think that you will start seeing that next week. And, I don't know this. I'm just guessing. I think John Schneider's been thinking about this for more than 3 months. I think he's been thinking this about for 2 or 3 years, quite frankly. And if you've seen some of the reports, they've said, we started to hear it at the end of the year. It's one of the reasons why I feel really validated that we talk about these things, because we've been talking about this for not just a couple of weeks. We've been talking about this for 2 or 3 years, guys. And then you have like legit national reporters, the creme de la creme who are covering the NFL, going, this has been a conversation for a long time, that Jody Allen was thinking of making a change of coach maybe 3 years ago. And she stuck by Pete and she made the decision. And now she's just got to a point where I've been thinking about doing this for a while and now I'm doing it. And in fairness, there's been a lot of people going, Jody will never fire Pete. She'll never do this. She'll never do that. And she has. She hasn't just done it. She was thinking about it for a while by all accounts. And now she's moved on. So that, I thought Joe Brady might be worth a shout. And I think if there are sort of going to be left field candidates, people like Alex Van Pelt at Cleveland could be somebody that they speak to as well. I can't think of anybody else off the top of my head. There's someone who's suggested a name in the super chat, so I'll come to that in a second. But there's 2 questions that are on my mind, and then I'll come to the super chats. First of all, obviously one coach we haven't talked about, and nobody seems to be talking about at the minute, is Mike Vrabel. He's not got the New England job. I think personally, I was watching, have you heard of the podcast Bussing with the Boys? It's the one with Taylor Lewan and the linebacker who used to play for the Commanders. I can't remember his name. They asked Mike Vrabel a question during this podcast. Again, it was during my SADACT week of trying to learn about these coaches. They asked him a question about whether he'd ever walked in on his son having a bit of personal self-time. And which was a staggering question to ask, all the more staggering that Mike Vrabel answered the question. And they made, I thought it was completely obscene and inappropriate, but they did have the conversation. And it did make me think, well, Mike Vrabel gives the impression that he is a bit of a stuffed shirt on the sideline, that he's constantly angry. The way I put it the other day was that he constantly looks like he wants to go onto the field and strangle somebody on his own team. But then I was watching this and I was thinking, actually, he might be, like, Johnny's quite a fun, laid-back, jokey kind of guy. And I was watching this and thinking, look, inappropriate questions from this podcast aside, that Mike Vrabel seems like that kind of guy as well. It's probably just a bit of a grump on game day. I don't think he's going to be the next Seahawks head coach, but have you got any thoughts on Vrabel, who, like I say, is just, everyone was kind of thinking he was going to go to New England, and now that's off the table. So is either going to go somewhere as a head coach, or what? Is he going to have a year off? Is he going to be a defensive coordinator? Adam, have you got any thoughts on Vrabel?
Yeah. It all just strikes me as fairly uninspiring. Robbie's sort of second-time coach thing really comes into view. I think if someone gets fired for a reason at this stage, to just rehire again, like, this isn't just any old job. This should be a really highly coveted, sought-after job. And I don't know. I just feel like you're setting the potential ceiling really low with the hire of Mike Vrabel. That's nothing against him, but outside of 1 year where they sort of freaked their way into number 1 overall seed because of strange quirk in their scheduling. I don't know, like take that. You can't do this, but take Derrick Henry out, and what really do you think you're going to get with Vrabel? Now, you know, if there's a Derrick Henry coming through the door and can play his system, then yeah, maybe it's something to think about. But good luck finding that.
Robbie Vrabel.
Yeah, it's a very uninspiring hire. I just, you know, like Adam said, if you got fired for a reason, there's a reason for it. Players seem to really like him, but players seem to really like Pete too. I don't think that should. I'd pass on Vrabel.
Yeah, and it's worth noting that I know they've had some issues there with their offensive line and some injuries and stuff, but they've done nothing for the last 2 years. Like his stars seem to be really sort of moving forwards when they were getting to like, did they get to the AFC Championship game 3 years ago? Am I right in saying that? You know, they made an improbable run in the playoffs, didn't they? And then lost to the Chiefs, I think, in the AFC Championship game, but gave them a game, but then lost to the Chiefs, and his star was really rising. And then he's done absolutely nothing since then. And I just think, look, I think it's essentially, it comes down to this. John wants an offensive-minded head coach, and he wants this to be a quarterback-driven, offensive-minded team that gets the most out of the weapons. And if he can't find that guy, then I think Dan Quinn is a useful sort of backup option, I think, who he can sort of, you know, he will turn to as a worst-case scenario. And that makes it sound worse than it is. I know, this game aside, but I don't think it's bad to have a backup option like that if you need to resort to it. Before I get to the Super Chats, I wanted to ask you guys this. What do you think that, because I've just told you what I think Schneider wants. You know, when you think of Schneider's personality, what kind of person is he going to want to work with? Is he going to want someone who is, you know, basically, for want of a better way of putting it, subservient to him, you know, treats him like a boss, is willing to just go, yes, sir, no, sir, thank you, sir, for that draft pick you've just spent on the offense or whatever? Or is he going to want somebody who is sort of working with him? You know, although John will have the power, but it's a partnership. They're level, they're sort of together all the time. You know, is he going to go for a younger coach who might be a bit more like treat him like a boss? Are they going to want to go for that offensive? Do you agree with me that it's, given his background at Green Bay and his clear love for scouting quarterbacks, that's probably... I even wonder whether they turned around to John a few weeks ago when ownership and went, what do you want to do with the team? And he was like, I want to draft a quarterback, and I want to get more out of DK and Jackson Smith and Jigba, and I want to be an offensive powerhouse. And they're like, yeah, we'll do that. You know, that's it. We don't want Pete bringing back Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs and going down that road again. We want to go with what John's going to go. That's what I think is essentially at play here. But have you got any thoughts on who John would want to work with in terms of style of coach and what his vision will be? Starting with you, Adam.
Pete made a really big deal in the press conference about this sort of ascension to power that Schneider had undergone. And I think he even made the point of saying, you know, it's taken you 14 years and now you finally got there. Now, I think Schneider is obviously going to want a personal relationship with the guy that he's working with, but I'm not sure if it is a with thing. I think that you're going to see a bit more of a hierarchical structure whereby the head coach is under the general manager, who is now given a chance to, because I mean, he's got to earn his job now and show himself to be, you know, to be worth keeping, I would say, to Jody, and who have shown some balls to fire, you know, the ultimate legend. And I wonder if maybe that might put it up Schneider a little bit to say, whoa, these people mean business. I need to prove myself. And as a result, I just wonder if maybe you will see that slightly more typical chain of command from GM to head coach, so that Schneider can kind of show what he's all about. And just to turn it back on you, and sorry, Robbie maybe can answer this one as well, but do you think John had any part in Pete being let go? Because there must have been some conversations in some capacity about what was going to happen if Pete left. And I don't know, like, I just wonder if there was...
I've got a thought on this, but Robbie, I'll let you take it first.
Absolutely. John had a hand in this. He, the way that Pete spoke in that press conference about John was a little uncomfortable. Really, right? I mean, it was like, you guys have been doing this together for 14 years, and that's how you're going to talk about him going out. I think John probably I'm speculating here, and this is pure just pulling shit out of my ass. So I apologize, but I'm guessing John probably wanted to go a different direction in the last draft. And Pete had some saying like, well, we'd rather go this way with a guy. And instead of taking the quarterback or something like that. And I think John wanted to go a certain direction. I think there was probably some animosity there. And if I'm guessing that, that Jody talked to him and said, what would you see your future being? And this is what he said, the future is probably without Pete Carroll. And Adam, you made a really good point. Like, I wonder, like, when they had that conversation, like, what direction do you want to see the team to go in? I'm guessing John probably said, like, I would like to take a quarterback and I'd like to do, these are the kind of things that I'd like to see. I just think, I think he absolutely had a hand and Pete's being let go.
I agree with Robbie, and I don't think it's ever been a case of John Schneider going into an office and them going, what do you want to do, John? Well, I want to fire the coach. And I don't think John's ever gone there and gone, if it was up to me, we'd move on from Pete Carroll. But I do think that he will have probably had meetings with ownership over the last few weeks, and they'll have asked him for his opinions, and you can very tactically steer. You can make it clear how you feel without saying, I want to fire the coach. What's gone wrong, John? Why are we on a 4-game losing streak? Well, the run defense that we've tried to fix, they haven't done it. And here's why, because the coaches are not doing this and the coaches are not doing that. And the players are not playing this. And we brought him in to do this and they're not getting it done with him. And, when we signed this guy, the view was that he could do this and they've got him doing this instead. And it's just not good enough. And, if we're going to improve this, we probably need to do this, and this. And you've just laid out, you can park blame in certain areas and you can make it clear. And then, well, what would your vision be? What would you like to do this offseason, John? And then you say something that full well that Pete Carroll would say the complete opposite of. So I think that's been it. I think Pete, there is so much. I'd love to get some truth serum out of Pete Carroll, because when he was saying that in the final 2 interviews that we've heard him do, he said at one point, did you expect, well, the question was, did you sort of see this coming a little bit? And he said, oh yeah, I knew I had to go and fight. I'd have to go and fight and compete for my job. So he was anticipating this. So when we were perhaps talking about, oh, Pete looks a bit haggard and he looks a bit down and he looks different, rather than it being sort of like, my interpretation of that was he's going to retire. I think it was preying on his mind. I'm going to lose my job. If I can't turn this around, I'm going to be out. And I think he knew that. And I think it was the right thing to say that when he was speaking on Brock and Salk on that Monday after the Arizona game, that he was essentially dress rehearsal for the chat with Jody. And what he said, oh, we're just too young and we're closer to a Super Bowl than we were a year ago. And we just need to fix things, and we can fix things, and we will fix things. And we've got to get this back and got to get that back. And by the way, Jamal's really cool and all. It was just like, this is the most unconvincing argument for you staying that I could possibly make. If I was to write a joke article about what's Pete going to say that could be the most unconvincing thing you'd ever hear, it was that. So I don't think it would have been that hard for John Schneider to cook up a better plan for the future than Pete Carroll was willing to offer there. And I think he was fired. And I think Robbie's right. What he was saying in that final press conference was I thought it was a little bit patronizing. You've been it's taken you 14 years to get to this point when you can run everything, and it's not going to be easy. Be careful, get ready for that, because you've got a lot coming your way. And I'm thinking, oh, come on. John Schneider knows what this job's going to be all about, Pete. He's been a GM for the last 14 years.
Sorry, I wanted to circle back to this. I said Adam made a really good point, and then I blacked out and forgot what he had said. So I want to circle back to it. I think this is Adam, you said, like, John's now fighting for his job as well. And I think that's 100%. He's getting given an opportunity now to, like, you're leading the charge. Don't screw it up. And I think he's not going to just pick somebody. I truly believe it can't be someone like Dan Quinn. That's just like someone that comes from Carroll's background. I think it's going to be someone that he has had his eye on for a while. He's probably really thought about it quite a bit and probably has, his number one and then a couple of fallbacks just in case, but like his job's on the line now too. And I think that's a good point to make, because it's going to be something that he's going to have to hit out a home run, or if not, in 2-3 years time, John can be looking for a new job as well.
Well, he's not going to get 2 goes at this, is he? You'd imagine. This is really
I would guess it's one and done. Yeah.
If he fails with disappointment, then he may well not get a second chance to do it. But do you think that Adam, what Robbie says there, do you think that's true? Do you think that because if he has only got one chance at this, how much of a risk is he prepared to take on somebody? Because when Robbie was speaking, I was thinking perhaps it makes someone like a Dan Quinn maybe just that smidgen more likely, because John knows him, John's worked with him before, he can build a good staff, there's not going to be any concerns there, and ultimately he might give himself the best chance at not having a shambolic situation in terms of the coaching staff. I suppose the other side of that is you also got his record in Atlanta is the definition of mediocre. It's average. And you might just end up with average, which is what we've had for the last few years. But how much of a risk do you think Schneider's willing to take if it is essentially your job might be on the line here, pal? You've got to get this right.
I think similarly to with the Russell trade, the second that John hires a coach, the sand time is going to get tipped over and there's 2 years worth of sand in the timer. I think it would be a little bit harsh and unfair to ask them to turn this around in 1 year. And, I think if it's a disaster, if it's 4-13 or whatever, then he'll get at least a couple of years. But I think they'll get a couple of years together. And I think if it's not working with John, it's probably not working with the coach as well. And so you can have a complete clean house and bring in another 1-2 punch at the same time. I don't think that, unless it's a complete disaster, in which case both might go anyway, that 1 year is going to be the true barometer of how Jody looks at what these guys are doing. That'll be my hunch anyway.
Okay, I've got to get to the super chats and then we'll wrap it up. But if you've got any last ones, stick them in now. But this is what I want to ask you now. I'm looking at Jerry Jones on the screen. And Jerry Jones looks really old these days, by the way. He constantly looks like he's just smelled a fart. Like he's got that sort of old man look, and he's at an age now where he's probably the one who's done the farts, quite frankly. And I would not trust a fart if I was him at that age. So he's going to fire Mike McCarthy this week. Mike McCarthy, when he was with the Packers, and they appointed what's his name? I keep calling him Guggenheim by accident, but that's not obviously not his second name.
Brian Gutenkust.
Gutenkust. It's a kind of.
There might be another N in there somewhere, but it's there or thereabouts.
Guti, I think everyone calls him. So when they appointed him, Mike McCarthy was pushing for John Schneider to be the GM. He was pushing for Green Bay to go after John Schneider, and it would have taken compensation to lure him away from the Seahawks. But that was apparently the guy that McCarthy wanted, John Schneider, to come back to Green Bay. If they are very close, and if Mike McCarthy is newly employable this week, could it be that he finds himself in Seattle? In the same way that it might be a hard sell to say to Seahawks fans, hey, you know that Dallas game that you saw the other day, which was really, really crap from a Cowboys point of view? Well, we've appointed their head coach for that game. The man who oversaw that is now the replacement for Pete Carroll. But I suppose he's offensive-minded. He's a former Super Bowl winner. He knows John Schneider. He is not a newbie who is going to be so raw that he's really, really bad or anything like that. There's probably a base level with Mike McCarthy of not being terrible. It's just whether or not he can be great. He has built a staff. I mean, look, not really funny. Dan Quinn might not get a head coaching job off the back of this, and maybe he comes as well as defensive coordinator. I mean, who knows? I'm just. How would you feel about that? Is it realistic that Schneider could just turn around and employ Mike McCarthy, his old friend from Green Bay? And two, how would you feel about that?
Rob, you don't stumble on your words often, and it took you 13 seconds of trying to put Mike McCarthy forward as a contender before you basically run out of things to say and were umming and ahhing which I think is as illuminating as anything. Optics matter, and I think losing a game like that in this manner just makes it a complete non-starter. If you go down 28-27 to a Jordan Love fourth quarter miracle drive, maybe you can squint one eye and close the other one and see a potential winning head coach coming in there. But no, I mean, if we're saying that Schneider's got one big swing at this, I can't see him taking someone that sets the ceiling lower than it needs to be.
Robbie?
I would be just the most uninspiring hire ever, right? The guy's been fired by the Packers and he's been fired by the Cowboys. Yeah, let's hire that guy. Bring him in. Ass.
Yeah, he'd hardly sort of fill you with the most confidence that he's going to suddenly go on a tear and beat out Shanahan and McVay. I mean, he is an offensive-minded coach. They had the 9th, I think it is, ranked offense this year, 14th last year. 2021, I'm looking at DVOA now. They had the 4th ranked offense. So he has been, somewhat productive with the offense. But yes, a hard sell. Right. We'll get through the super chats. Then this game should have ended. We can just put a bow on that and the whole stream. This one from Danny. Thoughts on this, guys? Maybe a long shot. Wes Welker, San Francisco and Miami ties. He's been working with the Dolphins and McDaniel. I mean, that is a left field shout, and I've never particularly warmed to Wes Welker, I must admit, from his time in New England. But any thoughts, Adam?
Not really, if I'm honest. I wasn't particularly aware that he was, particularly high up the coaching ladder. It sounds a bit like the Josh McCown stuff from a couple of years ago, where I don't think you can just sling any old offensive guy or bloke in because they played in the NFL. Now, that may be doing Welker a disservice. Maybe in a couple of years' time, he does, put himself in a position for hires like that. But that would be hugely surprising.
I think it'd be a bit of a stretch, wouldn't it, Robbie? He's not called plays. He's not been a coordinator. And if you would sort of see Ben Johnson go to the Commanders and then Bobby Slowick go to somewhere else or stay in Houston, and you end up with Wes Welker, it might feel a bit, well, this is a bit too risky.
Yeah, I'd rather take a chance on Frank Smith, to be honest, offensive coordinator for the Dolphins, than Wes Welker.
This one from Noah. AJ with almost 100 yards rushing. Do we really want to see the Pete defense again? Surely we can do better than Dan Quinn. Hope you guys stream each week. Noah, I don't know whether we'll stream each week, but I can guarantee you that there will be regular videos all the time. This feels like a really big moment in Seahawks history. And as you can probably see, I'm writing. And again, let me know what you think of that. Some of the articles I've written recently have been very long, and sometimes I'm conscious that they may be a bit too long. So I'm always interested in how people feel about that. But I am going to do videos all the time. We'll do stream. We've got another stream coming on Tuesday with Jeff. And yes, there'll be lots and lots of videos and content. And when anything big happens, we will all endeavor to get together and talk about it. Matt says, would you like to see the Seahawks on Hard Knocks next year? I'm not sure what the rules are for teams to opt out, but could be pretty fascinating. I think if you have a new coach, you almost like have to be tied to it, don't you, guys? There is a chance. Would you be interested? I've never wanted to see the Seahawks in that. How would you feel about it? It's never anything that's appealed to me, frankly.
I think it's the opposite. I think a first-time head coach gives you exemption.
Oh, really?
I think so. I think if you're a playoff team or you have a first-year head coach, I'm pretty sure that gives you exemption for being on Hard Knocks. But maybe someone will tell me that I'm wrong.
In 2013, the NFL adopted a formula aimed at avoiding a situation which no one would want it. 3 factors exempt a team. 1, having a new head coach. 2, making the playoffs in either of the 2 most recent seasons. 3, submitting to the show in the past 10 years. So the Seahawks were in the playoffs last year and they're having a new head coach. So they are, if they don't want to do it, they don't have to do it. So would you want to see it, Robbie?
I mean, I'd be interested just to see the behind the scenes. It'd be fun to just watch more Seahawks content, but give us more to talk about.
Blitzy, Rob, your output has been above and beyond lately in quality as well as quantity. So kudos. My take on Harbaugh to Seattle is I hate it. Right up to the moment he's announced, and then I fucking love it. Okay, Blitzy. Well, I think a lot of people will probably feel that way too. Danny says, Johnson, Slowick, McDonald, your move, John. That's how I feel. They're the 3 that I've kind of zoned in on the most. And Wit21 says, I think Jody Allen was embarrassed by Pete's players. That Jamal Adams tweet, I think, cost Pete his job and the money spent on subpar performances. I tend to agree. I think a lot of the shambles with that, the groin grab from Tariq Woolen, which was embarrassing, the cigars after the game, whatever the reason, it was just ill-judged. And just time. It just needed, the whole place just needs a bloody shake. Like it just, everyone needs a rocket. Everyone who's staying here, who was there before, needs to hear some fresh opinions, views, tactics, new voices. Just like even Pete sort of like saying, and then I spoke to Tater about that, whether to challenge that play. Because it was he challenged a play, didn't he, against the Steelers where it would have put the ball on the 7 instead of the 5. Like, and there was no consequences, and it was like still a first down either way. And you're thinking, what? Like, how? No! Like, this has to change. Like, no, we can't be relying on Tater to keep you in check, Pete. No. So it was time for a change. So just to sort of finish, I'm looking here. The Cowboys have got it back to 48-32. This is the most points given up by the Cowboys in playoff history, according to Twitter. And looking at the statistics, because the Packers, if they get the ball back now, we're just going to kneel down. Cowboys have given up 416 yards, 7.8 yards per play, 4.5 yards per rush, and this has included the backups. It was a lot worse, the numbers, than this, but the Green Bay put their backups in. That's how bad it has got. So the final thing I want to ask you guys, fellas, is this: how damaging is this going to be to the Dan Quinn stuff? I think the Jed Fish appointment is so utterly uninspiring from Washington that although it's going to get a bit of traction on the airwaves this week in Seattle sports, in the Seattle sports world, nowhere near as much as if they'd appointed a big name, exciting, get the juices flowing. So I think the Seahawks can be back on the agenda this week. I do think a lot of the talk tomorrow will be, do you really want Dan Quinn? So how damaging could this be for his hopes of getting the job? Adam.
I mean, it's a pretty reactionary sport, isn't it? For better or for worse, there's not a huge amount of nuance that goes into a lot of the talking heads when it comes to the NFL. And talk of what have you done for me lately, that is going to resonate. And, certainly the KJR boys that we listen to, Rob, I can quite imagine that would be them, off the wagon straight away. And I don't think I could criticize them for it, but I think more so in America than over here, the way in which people react to certain things is just a bit more binary, not even as a negative. I just think it does, you're good or you're not. And I think Mike McCarthy and Dan Quinn are very much not today. And I would imagine that will be enough to steer the conversation well away from Dan Quinn for rightly or wrongly based on the game today.
And just on Jed Fish, by the way, Justin Spears, who covers sports in Arizona, has tweeted out about him, Jed Fish, leaving Arizona. The team meeting was very short. Jed Fish walked in, said that he's leaving for Washington, and left. The players are not happy. I can only hope, Robbie, that the Seahawks appoint someone who is going to create a better first impression than that. But what are your thoughts on, final reaction as we count down the seconds? Dallas may well score again. It might end up being a 10-point game, but the game is over. The Dallas Cowboys are out. They've given up an absolute ton of yards and points, and Dan Quinn's stock taking a massive hit tonight. Do you think it will be what does for him as a hot candidate for the Seahawks? Do you think that this will push John Schneider towards an offensive-minded coach? Could this help those of us who would prefer that?
I think it may help some of the fan base people. I actually don't think Dan Quinn was actually really. I think he was going to be interviewed, but I don't know if he was ever seriously going to be in consideration. I think John's got someone else in mind. I just don't know who.
You will find out a little bit more this week when we hear about who they are going to potentially be interviewing. One thing I would just finish with, guys, is as I'm seeing people get a bit impatient with, Mike Macdonald interviewed with the Falcons this week. And these are only Zoom interviews. Mike Macdonald's playing a game next weekend. Mike Macdonald's main focus right now is coaching the Baltimore Ravens to the Super Bowl. And it might actually benefit the Seahawks not to be pestering these guys when they've still got the biggest games of their careers so far coming up. So there's no rush. They're not going to appoint somebody this week in all likelihood, unless it is Dan Quinn or Mike McCarthy. It is going to be a process whereby you have to sort of go through it. And if the candidate you want is still in the playoffs, Bobby Slowick, as of right now, still is. Ben Johnson, as of right now, still is. McDonald, as of right now, still is. It could even be Slowick against McDonald next weekend, which would be really interesting. You are not going to be able to do anything until all of that is done. So just saying, have a bit of patience, let the process play out, and we'll track it all the way. SeahawksDraftBlog.com for more analysis. Adam, Robbie, thank you so much for an hour and 45 of your time. It is massively appreciated.
Always a pleasure. Love doing it.
And stay tuned for more videos on this channel. Make sure you subscribe. Like the video. That really helps. Leave a comment, even if, as I always say, if it's just to say Go Hawks in the comment section. That always helps as well. Subscribing is really important. Until next time, we'll see you later. Bye for now.